The Amalfi Coast has been intensively populated since the early Middle Ages. You can still clearly see traces of this in the architecture. Most of the villages have grown up around the beaches that are formed where rivers meet the sea, others on prominent viewpoints or near fertile pastures in the higher areas. The topography dictates the form. Many of the villages have expanded from the riverbanks and the beaches up along the sides of the hills, resulting in a network of narrow and steep stepped alleys, with houses built more or less one on top of the other. The streets and alleys gravitate towards a central village piazza, built on the little piece of flat land you could find, normally near the church, easily distinguishable from the rest of the urban fabric by its Arabic-influenced Majolica domes that are typical for this area. The rural areas are characterized by narrow terraces, built wherever possible for cultivating the steep hillsides into vineyards, olive groves, or orchards of lemon trees that produce the famous Amalfi Coast lemons. Above the populated areas, you'll find high mountains and dense forests. Below and between the villages, rough cliffs mark the transition between land and sea. The beauty of the landscape, both natural and cultural, has for decades been protected by strict heritage regulations. And the Amalfi Coast has since 1997 also been included on UNESCO's World Heritage List. The heritage regulations have preserved the area and contributed to its exceptional beauty, with both the unique villages and the rural landscape remaining as unchanged as possible. But, naturally, it does bring some limitations as to what we can and cannot do with the building and the land, some of which we obviously would have been happy to do without. But it comes with the territory, quite literally, so we just have to work with it and not against it. So to cut this short, in general, it's completely out of the question to build something new here. The only way you can build anything at all on a site like ours is if there's already an old house there to restore, or as in our case, the remains of a house. That's also why the value of a ruin here is a lot more than its actual building materials, and why the land is worth relatively little without at least a ruin on it. And it doesn't stop there. Even if there is an old house on the site, you'll only be allowed to repair it back to the appearance it once had. And you can only do that if you can prove beyond reasonable doubt that this is what it used to look like. You can't demolish anything, nor can you make any additions, except for a minor expansion to include a small bathroom, if the house didn't already have one. But that's it. So that doesn't leave us with a lot of space for facade creativity. And I'm sorry for those of you who already had visions of panorama windows, glass pyramids, bold court and steel additions. Won't be any of that here, I'm afraid. We're fine with that though. We wanted an old traditional looking farmhouse, and if all goes well, that's what we'll have. If we had wanted a modern summer house, we probably would have looked elsewhere. Inside the house, we're of course free to choose any style we like, but it's very likely we'll want to continue the traditional character also here. We'll probably pair it with some more modern elements though. After all, we're not creating a museum. We obviously knew about the strict building regulations in the area when we started ruin hunting, so this was no surprise. But we also needed to check if there were any obstacles on this specific property that we needed to know about. So before placing our offer on the property, we sought advice from various professionals regarding the possibilities of repairing it both technically and in terms of permissions. Regarding construction and building reparation, we found it was totally doable, although obviously not cheap. No surprises there either. As for permissions, the regional and local zoning plan did permit us to restore and subsequently inhabit the house, but that was only because the building sat in this exact position. Had it been 100 meters to either side, it would have been in a zone with increased risk of landslides, and we might not have been allowed to live in it. Good to know before buying. Another thing we found during this research was, as we mentioned in an earlier video, that even though it's quite apparent that all of the house once had a roof, this would not necessarily guarantee that we would be able to restore it where it's crumbled. That might be considered a new build, which, as explained before, is not allowed here. That was obviously a little bit of a bummer. But the house is big enough for us to make it work, also without those two roofless rooms. And they could of course make a nice patio, but they would be an even nicer bedroom and living room, so getting a permit for that would be better. And as you now know, we decided to take the chance. It might sound optimistic to rely on luck plus the common sense of Italian bureaucracy, but that is what we decided to do. So how do we go about finding out specifically what we're in fact allowed to do, and how do we proceed to actually doing it? To navigate all this, a very important function is necessary, the geometra. We found our geometra, Nicola, through local friends. He has lived and worked in the village all his life and obviously knows the area and its building regulations like the back of his hand. A geometra is essential when you want to renovate or build in Italy. The function is a sort of a crossover between land surveyor, architect, engineer, project manager, a very useful function that will both tell us what is possible to do or not. He'll be in charge of the building application and the contact with the authorities, hire a contractor, and oversee the whole building phase. Normally, the geometer will also produce the drawings, but as I'm an architect, I'll do the groundwork there myself, based on the geometer's guidance, and have him fill in the blanks and adjust the drawings to meet with Italian standards. So, after having concluded the purchase of the property, we spent autumn planning and preparing for the building application. Questions, explanations, drawings, and building descriptions were emailed and telephoned back and forth between Norway and Italy. And come January 2023, our geometer and his assistants were getting ready to submit the application. So we got on the train, travelled through 7 countries, and arrived in Ravello in the end of January to spend a week completing the application together with the geometer. Ravello in summer is lovely. Even though the village has a reputation for being calmer and with a slower pace than the rest of the coast, in the tourist season it's still buzzing with life. Ravello in the winter is different. The village closes down for the season. Totally. That is, there is generally always one bar open and one restaurant. But that's basically it. All the shops, apart from the ones that are absolutely necessary to the locals, are closed. So are the hotels. But then, of course, there are no tourists there to keep them open for. The locals seem to stay indoors too. It is simply a totally different village. But we weren't there to sip spritz in the piazza anyway. We had a job to do.
Cos'è che dobbiamo
dobbiamo decidere o fare questa settimana?
Allora.
Cos'è il nostro scopo?
Questo è il PUT, è lo strumento sovracomunale, regionale, quindi è la legge regionale che serve poi per redigere il PUC, il piano urbanistico comunale. E anche in questa zona qua ci consente il restauro e il risanamento conservativo dell'immobile, in quest'area qua. Questo è il piano stralcio dell'autorità di bacino, cioè quello che regola il vincolo idrogeologico, il rischio da frana, eccetera, eccetera. E la nostra area sta in questa zona verde, che è un rischio moderato, è quella migliore che ci possa essere. Questa invece è la normativa del PUC, del piano urbanistico comunale, e io qua ho evidenziato l'intervento che noi possiamo realizzare. Possiamo attuare manutenzione ordinaria, manutenzione straordinaria, restauro e risanamento conservativo, perché in questa fase l'elemento importante è ricostruire quello che dobbiamo ricostruire e acquisire l'autorizzazione della sovrintendenza, che è il momento più delicato di tutti.
In order to complete the application this week, we divide the work between us, meaning that Nicola the geometer does almost everything and I make some small adjustments to drawings and illustrations. The next day, we woke up to Ravello under the winter sun, which was a totally different experience. Even though the town was still very calm and quiet, the beauty of it was again apparent. We decided to skip drawing corrections for one day and instead take a trip down the several hundred steps between Ravello and Marmorata to see how the house was holding up over the winter. The house was still standing, although it did seem like a good idea to get started with the restoration sooner rather than later. But we were pleased to see how many of the fruit trees that seemed to be in good shape, despite having had to fend for themselves for so long. These trees have not been harvested for years and should probably get a good round of tender love and care to be able to fully thrive. We hope we'll be able to give them the care that they need in the coming years, so we can start harvesting our own Amalfi Coast lemons. We continued working on the building application throughout the week, me on the various drawings and illustrations, the geometer on all the maps, analysis and specifications, and putting it all together. And come Friday, we were ready to complete the work.
Questa è la relazione tecnica. Ho descritto l'intervento che noi vogliamo realizzare, partendo dal fatto che è un fabbricato, sostenendo che è un fabbricato di origine rurale, nel senso che era un fabbricato a servizio di un fondo agricolo, fabbricato che è in disuso da secoli, da tempo, per cui noi intendiamo fare degli interventi di recupero della volumetria esistente senza alcuna modifica, proprio riproponendo la configurazione dell'intero edificio, dove andremo a realizzare la ricostruzione della volta fatta con le vecchie tecniche, la ricostruzione dei solai di copertura con le vecchie tecniche. Andremo a fare gli intonaci esterni, dove riusciamo a recuperarli manteniamo quelli esistenti, dove non sarà possibile andremo a fare gli intonaci con le vecchie tecniche, con la malta di calce. È un intervento sicuramente migliorativo, cioè non andiamo a modificare nulla. Cioè,
No, è abbastanza modesto.
Sì, no, è modestissimo, recuperiamo solo quell'indispensabile. Noi siamo in un'area di riserva generale, questo verde qua, dove l'intervento che intendiamo fare è possibile realizzare. Quindi dal punto di vista della pianificazione urbanistica non abbiamo difficoltà.
So, technically, there should be no problem obtaining a permit for what we would like to do. However,
adesso è nella interpretazione della norma per la ricostruzione della volta, perché l'ufficio ritiene che sia restauro, la sovrintendenza potrebbe considerarla una ristrutturazione, ma noi non andiamo a ristrutturare, andiamo a recuperare il preesistente, perché il restauro non è che prevede solo la riparazione, ecco, tra virgolette, il restauro prevede anche la ricostruzione di quelle parti che non esistono più, perché il restauro è questo. Allora adesso il procedimento qual è? Noi oggi depositiamo, l'ufficio tecnico farà una prima istruttoria, quando avrà istruito il progetto e avrà espresso il parere favorevole dal punto di vista urbanistico, la pratica va nella commissione locale per il paesaggio, che è una commissione che ha nominato il comune. Acquisito questo parere della commissione locale per il paesaggio, la pratica viene istruita e mandata alla sovrintendenza, la quale valuta il progetto ed il parere della commissione locale per il paesaggio e si esprime sul progetto.
Ok, e per la pratica del rudere,
Sì.
6-7 mesi speriamo o...
6-7 mesi se siamo fortunati,
sì.
abbiamo il titolo che ci autorizza. Dopodiché
Nicola's probably thinking, that's the minimum. I'm obviously thinking, with some luck it could also be faster. In time it will be revealed who has the best bet here. But anyway, if the Studio Tecnico del Comune and the Commissione and the Soprintendenza all agree with us, the house will in time look something like this. Supposedly similar to how it once was built, more or less. Although we do believe that there has once also been a volume on what's now the terrace, but that would be so unlikely to get a permit for that we have put it off, at least for now. All those drawings, plus some more, and all the maps, analysis of context, history and regulations, and the accounts of what materials and techniques we're planning to use, were collected together in a huge pile of papers that were all to be signed and stamped in various places to make sure we're all totally conscious of what we're doing here. And, since we're in Italy, they're all to be handed in physically, in paper form. Which I kinda like, even though it seems not all that streamlined and efficient. But again, if we wanted modern, we could have stayed at home. So, application in hand, we make our way to the Municipio del Comune di Ravello. And now, the matter was in the hands of the Studio Tecnico of the municipality of Ravello. And we had to prepare for a long, long wait. But the waiting would also give us plenty of time for other things that had to be done, such as clearing up the dense jungle that had formed around the house over the centuries to get a picture of what the land we had purchased actually looked like. And that we'll get back to in our next video.